I'm starting to notice a red trend around here, and I think I kind of like it. I worked for a Case IH dealer long enough. It's about time I added a decent sized red tractor to the fleet. And I figured, since I'm on this kick of buying and collecting, old vegetable tractors or South Jersey specials, it would only make perfect sense for me to own one of the quintessential South Jersey specials, or the OG South Jersey special, I should call it. What you're looking at here is what I would consider the patriarch of many South Jersey vegetable farming operations then and now. If you're from New Jersey and your family had any kind of ties to vegetable farming, or truck farming as some people called it, there's a good chance you either owned or put some hours on one of these things here. And I just decided I wanted to have one of these for myself. Of course, my family has ties to these tractors. I have a special place in my heart, so it was only fitting that I pick one up for myself. So what you're looking at here is a 1949 Farmall Super AV, made by International Harvester, obviously. And the Super AV is the high clearance version of the Super A. I wouldn't exactly call it a high crop. I know some of the international gurus would consider this a high crop because it sits taller, but compared to like a 2-cylinder John Deere high crop or a Ford high crop of the same era, these don't sit quite as high. So I would call these a high clearance, but definitely not a high crop. But nonetheless, they're still a neat conversation piece, and especially, being out here in Pennsylvania, there aren't many of these tractors out here, so it makes for a good conversation. But like I said, many of these tractors were shipped to southern New Jersey back in the day, and even to this day there are still dozens and dozens of farms that are still getting it done with the old offset international high clearance tractors. And these tractors put food on the table and paid the bills for a lot of farming families back in the day. And they also sent a lot of IH dealers' kids to college, at least in New Jersey anyway. I don't know how many of these were shipped to New Jersey, but I would say they probably outnumbered the more traditional Farmall A's and Super A's, because everybody at one time or another was farming vegetables. And these high clearance tractors and offset tractors were designed specifically for cultivating vegetables, and that's what they did very well. They were, cheap, affordable tractors. Parts were easy to get because they were interchangeable with the more common A, Super A, B, Super C, and so on. And they were easy to maintain, easy to work on, and pretty easy to store too, because they were fairly compact for their size. Everybody knows the Farmall A and Super A were one of the most popular tractors ever produced. You see them everywhere. They're about as common as dirt. But a lot of people don't know that they made the high clearance configurations. But I would say in New Jersey, where I come from, there were more of these sold than the traditional, non-high clearance models. You could drive within 5 miles of where I grew up and find probably 2 dozen of these things still being used, or still, sitting in somebody's barn, or being used to pull hay rides or whatnot. So they have a place in a lot of New Jersey families' hearts. And if you're wondering what designates a high clearance model, at least in the Farmall lineup, a lot of it comes down to the wheels and the front end equipment. The Super AV and AV and 140 high clearance and other related models have taller spindles or taller knees. The front axle you see here sits up a lot higher because the spindles are about 6 inches taller. And the high clearance models also have their own special front wheels with 19-inch rims, which I don't think you see on anything else. I don't know that I've ever seen a 19-inch rim or tire on any other piece of equipment. So that's another thing that makes these tractors kind of unique. And over the years, you can see how they put these extensions on a 19-inch rim to fit the standard center. The welds would break. It wasn't uncommon to see. And when that would happen, instead of trying to weld them back together, guys would just replace them with wheels off of a regular A or Super A. But that's actually not correct for a high crop. To give you the proper clearance, you got to have the 19-inch front wheels and tires. So like I said, 6-inch taller spindles, the 19-inch front wheels and tires. And at the rear, they had these larger dished centers that you see here with 36-inch tires. And to my knowledge, that was the only size available on these high clearance tractors, were the 36 inches to level them out. You could get a 9.5 by 36 or a 12 by 36. Another characteristic of the high clearance tractors was they had their own set of drop bars, or extensions I guess you could call them, to mount the drawbar. They mounted to the final drive housings and they swung down in kind of an L shape. Without those, you know, if you tried to mount your drawbar to the traditional mounting studs here, like a regular A or Super A, the drawbar would be up here. And if you're trying to pull wagons or pull any kind of attachment, that is basically useless. So they had to add those special drop extensions. And the neat thing about these tractors is a lot of them were actually ordered without drawbars and without rear PTOs. I don't know that I've seen many AVs or Super AVs with PTOs. I mean, I've seen a couple of them, but it's very, you know, you're much more likely to see them with just the blank plate here on the back. Because again, like I said, many of these were set up strictly for cultivating and nothing else. Occasionally with the drawbar, they would be used to pull wagons around or pull a mower, but that's pretty much it. I mean, these are definitely a specialty tractor, and they were designed to serve one purpose, cultivating one row at a time. And, you know, in its time, it may not have been the most efficient setup compared to a 2, 3, or 4 row tractor, but, you know, it was enough to get the job done for a lot of the small, you know, vegetable farming families, and it sure beat a horse. And as a matter of fact, case in point, my great-grandfather, when he moved out of South Philadelphia in the 1920s, moved to South Jersey and started vegetable farming on his own. He, for years, used horses, and, you know, being a stubborn, stuck in his ways, old school Italian, he was very reluctant to change. Well, when my grandfather got to be about 14 or 15 years old, you know, they were looking to expand their vegetable operation, and he knew that the only way they were going to be able to gain efficiency was to upgrade to tractors. And my great-grandfather was very hesitant to upgrade from horses to tractors. But with enough pestering and convincing, my grandfather was able to get him to purchase his first new tractor. And in 1943 or 44, he purchased a Farmall AV, not a Super AV because they hadn't come out yet, just a regular AV. And that was during World War II, so there were a lot of material shortages going on, kind of like what we've seen, you know, the last couple of years with COVID and everything, because all of the materials were being sent for the war effort, and manufacturers, as a result, had to resort to, you know, building equipment for the war and slowing down production on, you know, consumer products. And that was the case, you know, when my great-grandfather went to purchase his first tractor. So he ordered a new AV with cultivators and with the pneumatic lift-all, which was a primitive version of hydraulic lift that used exhaust vacuum to lift cultivators up. And it took like 6 or 7 months, I think my grandfather said, to actually get the tractor in. But it came in by rail, which was how International shipped most of their equipment back in the day. And he picked it up at our local dealer, which was Swedesboro Supply in Swedesboro, New Jersey. And I think that dealer thrived on selling AVs and Super AVs alone, because there were just so many of them, you know, sent to that area in particular. And my great-grandfather instantly fell in love with it. He was reluctant to get the tractor, you know, to make the initial purchase, but once he started using it, he realized what he was missing out on, and he loved that tractor so much he basically ran it into the ground. And in 1950, he traded it in on a new Super AV with hydraulic lift. And I actually have the original title for that tractor with the serial number, so I'm trying to see if I can maybe track that tractor down, because I have no record of whatever happened to it. But it's my understanding that he held on to that thing until he quit farming in the mid-70s, and then he passed away a few years later. And when my grandfather broke off, you know, bought his own farm and started doing his own vegetables, one of the first tractors he bought was a Super AV. And I don't know if he bought it brand new. I think he may have bought it slightly used, which is, you know, something he liked to do and get him a little bit cheaper that way. But he purchased a Super AV set up with cultivators just like this one you see here, and he ran that tractor up until 1979. And the story I got was it burned up in a barn fire at a neighboring farm where he was storing his equipment. And my best guess is they probably scrapped it. To my knowledge, it wasn't saved or restored or anything. You know, that was in the middle of the growing season. I think that fire happened like right in the middle of summer when he needed a cultivating tractor for asparagus. So on a whim, he went to a farm sale down in Delaware. He picked up an AV, you know, I guess, fairly cheap, just as quick as he could, just so he could be back in business. And he brought it back up to Jersey, and he farmed with that tractor. He used that one for cultivating asparagus up until pretty much up until he retired in the mid 80s. And then in the years after that, my uncle actually used that tractor for cultivating Christmas trees in his nursery. And he used that tractor probably up until the mid 90s or early 90s, and then it got sold to a fellow who had a vegetable farm a couple towns over, and he had a handful of AVs and Super AVs, and the guy actually passed away about 2 years ago. And from what I was able to find, his wife sold it on auction, and it ended up in Connecticut. So I'm going to check with the guy's widow actually this coming weekend. I'm planning to meet with her to just check some serial numbers and make sure everything matches up. And then, if it all checks out, I'm going to try and get a hold of the guy in Connecticut and see if he'll trade that tractor for this one, because it would be pretty cool to have another family tractor back. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say, but I'm hoping it's the right one if all the numbers and details match up. But my thinking, in buying this tractor was I could, have something to trade the guy straight up. And it would be, like I said, it would be cool to get the family tractor back. So we'll see where it goes. But this Super AV you see here, I picked this tractor up from the family of the original owner, and it spent its life on a farm in West Effort, New Jersey, which is right along the banks of the Delaware River. So it's very sandy, and that's, ideal conditions for vegetable growing. A lot of the vegetable farms in South Jersey were, in sandy soil. What's pretty cool is this tractor, with its original patina, still has some of the remnants of its original dealer sticker. You might be able to see the name Delbert there, and that would be Delbert Robinson, which was the International Harvester dealer in Elmer, New Jersey. And of course, being in vegetable country, a lot of these tractors really never did travel far from where they were originally sold. So this tractor was sold new in Elmer, New Jersey, spent its life in West Effort, New Jersey, and then when the family sold out, it ended up at the cousin's farm just outside of Elmer, New Jersey again. So it never really did go far. And then I bought it off of the cousin who was trying to liquidate for the family. And it's pretty cool to be able to buy this off the family of the original owner. And one of the reasons I wanted this particular tractor was because of its original patina. You can see just at a quick glance, it tells a story. It's got so much character here. And, it's not unusual to see a well-aged, or I guess ripe-aged AV or Super AV tractor from New Jersey, because they very rarely ever saw paint. A lot of the guys that were farming vegetables never really put any effort into painting their tractors. They just kind of, let them rust away. I know my grandfather's Super AVs were no exception. But like I said, the patina really tells a story. You can see, again, remnant of the dealer sticker, remnant of the original Farmall decal. And on this side, you can see remnants of the AV Cultivision decal, which is kind of cool. And the only thing I'm not sure about is on the grill here. It looks like it would have originally had the Farmall badge going across the front, which would be correct for a regular AV or A. But the Supers had the IH, the updated IH badge right in the center. So, I guess there could be a chance that it either had the wrong badges put on from the factory, because International was known to do that from time to time, or it could be that the original grill got damaged and somebody swapped it out with one from a regular AV. We'll never really know for sure, but either way, it really matches the nice patina of the whole tractor. And like I said, it tells a story. These things just have so much character. And if you grew up on a farm in South Jersey, vegetable country, I think everybody and their brother could tell stories of cultivating with the old Farmall offset tractors, because there were just so many of them running around. Another pretty cool characteristic of this original tractor is it's still sporting the original straight bar tires in the rear. You see this side's got some weather checking, but the tread's really mostly still there. The other tire looks to have been replaced. It looks like it was a new old stock Goodyear straight bar. You can see it's got the old school diamond sidewalls. I love this style of tire. I got them on the 520 as well, and I'm hoping to maybe find a set for the 60 if I get lucky. But the thing with these cultivating tractors was, you weren't doing heavy work with them. You were just cultivating, so you weren't really spinning the tires much. So they never really wore out. It's not uncommon to see one of these tractors that's still sporting, at least one of its original drive tires. I mean, who knows why this one was replaced? It could have been a million different reasons, but typically they would dry rot before they ever had the chance to, wear out the treads. And there's a very, very good chance that this is the original tire on this side. So it's another neat characteristic of these tractors. And while these tractors didn't really see abuse per se, I mean, it's safe to say I think they saw a lot of neglect, mostly because a lot of the farms just didn't have the space to store them inside. And in the case of a vegetable farming operation where you've got, 10, 20, or 30 people working out in the field at one time, it wasn't unusual for there to be multiple different people jumping on and off of a tractor over the course of a day's work. So these tractors saw a lot of different operators. They saw a lot of long hours out in the dusty conditions. And when you're cultivating, I mean, typically you don't need to run your engine wide open throttle. It's not necessary because you're really not putting it under a load. But unfortunately, that actually proved to be detrimental to these C113 engines, because if they didn't get up to proper operating temperature, they had a habit of cracking the block. And you can see this one here is no exception. It's actually pretty common on these AVs and Super AVs to see a crack all along the side of the block behind the carburetor. Just like I said, simply because they weren't run hot enough, or the oil wasn't changed frequently enough. There's a couple of contributing factors there, but like I said, cultivating tractors weren't really run that hard, and it actually ended up being detrimental more than helpful. But in typical South Jersey farmer fashion, rather than replace the whole engine, or replace the block at least, they just resorted to welding them up. And it certainly gives a character. I can't tell you how many of these tractors I've seen that have had the blocks welded, but it really tells a story. And it adds to the overall patina. This thing, a lot of these tractors that are still surviving have been through hell and back, so it just adds to the the storyline of this machine here. You'll also notice that one of the tie rods here on the left side has been replaced at some point, because that's not the original color. It looks like it came off of an industrial, or it was intended for an industrial tractor. But it's also not unusual to see the front ends on these, having parts replaced, because being an offset tractor, you sit on the right hand side, and when you're sitting up there in the seat, you can't see your left front wheel. So, as a result, if somebody got too close to a hedgerow or turn row or something like that, it wasn't unusual for them to run into stuff with the left side. And I know my family's Super AV was no exception. My uncle tells the story of how he turned just a little too short at the end of a row, and he hit a tree with the spindle here, and it actually broke underneath where it goes into the axle tube. So if I ever come across a tractor that's broken and re-welded there, I'll know that that's the original family's, Super AV. But I haven't had any luck yet. But back to my point, I mean, like I said, a lot of these tractors saw, damage to the front ends because of that specifically. So I'm sure at some point somebody, ran this into something, probably bent the original tie rod, and also presumably put that dent in the grill. But it's, it's another characteristic of these tractors that makes them so neat. Take a look at the pedals here. You'll notice the clutch pedal shows signs of wear, which is to be expected, but the brake pedal's not so much. And that's because, in sandy South Jersey soils, the ground's all flat, so guys really never did need to use the brakes for stopping. It was common that they used them for turning at the end of a row, but even still, the pedals don't show a terrible amount of wear. And when I got this tractor, the latch for the pedals was actually stuck. It was rusted stuck in the unlatched position, because nobody on these, with these cultivating tractors, nobody ever, drove them with the brakes locked together, at least that I know of, because everybody was using them just to steer at the end of a row. So that's another characteristic of these cultivating tractors as opposed to a regular A or Super A. And you can see, just look at the signs of wear. You got to think somebody spent hours and hours and hours on that steel pan seat looking out over top of the vegetable row. And that view is what paid the bills for a lot of families back in the day. Part of my plan for this tractor has been to try and preserve the original patina as best I can. There were a couple little things on it that were not correct when I got it, and I've just been slowly straightening those out. Somebody had rigged up a battery box here. It looks like they just welded a couple thin pieces of plate together. That's not unusual to see on these tractors, because the batteries would leak and they would rot out underneath. You can see that one even the one that they had homemade is starting to rot out as well. So I tried to search for a good original battery box, and the guy I got the tractor off of was nice enough to give me a couple pieces of an original patina battery box. So I mean, it at least looks decent. It looks somewhat correct from the other side, but if I can find the third missing piece, I'll definitely get that installed on there to make it all correct. And evidently the original muffler had rusted out because somebody replaced it with a piece of what looked like muffler lining. I mean, it looked like a muzzle of a gun. It was just like a piece of pipe with a bunch of holes in it, and it was just kind of loosely sitting there in the top of the manifold. It wasn't even secured, so it sounded good, but it didn't look right. So I got rid of that real quick, and I had to replace the outlet pipe, the threads into the top of the exhaust manifold. I had to retap the threads in the manifold, and then I got a good used muffler off of a Super A, which matches the patina pretty well, I think. And unfortunately, I had to trim a couple inches off the top just to get it to fit under my 7-foot bay door there. But I mean, I think it still looks pretty good. And like I said, trying to keep to the original patina theme of the tractor here. When I first got it, the starter would not always engage. Sometimes it would grind with the ring gear, so I had it rebuilt with a new switch, and looks all right now. It seems to work okay now too. And another thing I thought was kind of neat, speaking of original patina, I uncovered a lot of grease with the pressure washer, and it looks like it still has an original IH 6-volt coil, so that's pretty cool. I just love seeing tractors like this that have been so well preserved, and to see one with its original 6-volt system still intact is pretty neat as well. At this point, I think the only thing that looks out of place is the red wire running up to the coil from the hot lead here in the wiring harness, and that is because at some point in the past, somebody had decided to bypass the 20 amp fuse and instead just wire the starter switch in hot directly to the coil. I don't know why you would bother bypassing it. It's a pretty simple circuit. There's really not much to it. But in doing that, they also relocated the push-pull switch to a bracket here on the side of the instrument panel. So the switch was actually out here. Again, I don't know why somebody would go to all that trouble. It just makes more sense to pull the battery out and fix it the right way. But needless to say, that was the first thing to fix. I fixed a lot of the wires under the dash column there. I put another good push-pull switch on there because the original one was literally falling apart, and it was held together with zip ties, which was kind of funny. But I put it all back to the way it should be. But other than that, I mean, everything here, I've tried to keep it as close to original patina as I can. I think this tractor may have had magneto ignition originally, but like many of them, was converted over to coil ignition, as you can see here. But either way, I mean, having the original IH coil there is still pretty neat. And I mean, you can see it's really got decent patina overall, nice character. The cultivator toolbars still have most of their paint. These were painted red, white, and blue. You can see there's still some remnants of white paint, and then the rear-mounted cultivator bars still have blue paint on them. I have them in the shop there. I took them off, like I said. But I think these are pretty tight too, because I mean, usually when these tractors get some hours on them, you see the cultivator arm assemblies are all wore out. But so I don't know if this one maybe had a new set of cultivators installed or what, but I mean, you can see the points and shovels all look good. I mean, they're really not terrible, all things considered. And I got a few extra sets of cultivator shanks with this tractor as well. So, if I ever wanted to mount them all up, I could do that. It's even still got the original International logo on the bar there, which is kind of neat. When I got this tractor, I was having some issues with some pretty bad oil leaks, and I pulled the hood off and degreased the top half of the engine. The head and the valve cover were just completely caked in old dried oil and grease. And I got it all cleaned off, and I found that the valve cover gasket was blown in 2 different spots. So I took that all apart, adjusted the valves, decarboned everything, cleaned it all up, put a new valve cover gasket on, and I also replaced the upper radiator hose, because somebody had replaced that a couple years ago with a piece of hose that was about 2 inches too long, and it was just kind of kinked and shoehorned in there, and it was leaking out very slowly. So I took that all apart and took the time to replace it and fix it right. And it seems to be okay now. I mean, the engine's got a lot of hours on it. It's got blow by. You can see it's leaking some oil out of the spark plug holes. And evidently the front main seal is bad as well, but I mean, it's not bad enough that it really concerns me. I just keep the oil and coolant topped off, should be all right. You know, with the age of these tractors, you know, it's not unusual to see the engine or the touch control hydraulic block just completely covered in dry, caked on oil. It kind of, again, it's one of those things that gives them character. But this one overall, I think, cleaned up pretty well. So we'll climb up on this thing, get it fired up. Just a thing to look out for: if your cultivators are worn on the right hand side on one of these tractors, it's more than likely because somebody used them as a step to climb up. High clearance tractors are not always the easiest to get on, but everybody seemed to use cultivators as a step, so whatever works. But IH Cultivision, designed so you can look right down the row that you're cultivating as you go. Pretty straightforward concept with these offset tractors, and they take a little bit of getting used to, but I mean, like I said before, the biggest thing is you just have to be mindful of where your left front wheel is, because you can't see it right away. Also, because I'm missing one of the sides, or one of the panels to the battery box, there's nothing to brace the instrument panel to the front of the, or I guess the rear of the touch control hydraulic box. So sometimes when you move the throttle or you move one of the touch control levers, it moves this whole panel back and forth. So that's why you might see the cultivators go up or down when I adjust the throttle. So I'll have to fix that if I can find another missing, you know, the one missing panel there to complete the battery box. But anyway, let's get this thing fired up here. I have to get the carburetor clean because it only wants to run on full choke, but that's, you know, nothing to worry about. If you get the choke set right, the thing fires right up. The 6-volt system is nice when it actually works the way it's supposed to. As long as you got the battery charged up and your generator's good. Common characteristic of the old Farmalls, all the teeth are worn here for the where the throttle goes in. Gives it character. You can tell that center steering wheel hasn't been off in a long time, probably since the tractor was new. But and that's actually wide open throttle. It's really not that high of on RPM, which is part of the reason these engines really never got hot enough. But they have a good sound to them, that's for sure. Carburetor too. Like I said before, it's not unusual to see these tractors with the whole side of the engine or the side of the touch control box just covered in grease. Pretty common characteristic of them. Idles down pretty good too. These little 4-cylinders were pretty forgiving and pretty tough for what they were. I was having some issues with it getting coolant in the oil, but I think that was because of the either the valve cover gasket or that radiator hose that was leaking, because I noticed it wasn't sealing very good behind the arm there for the fan where it bolts up to the block. But ever since I got it back together, it seems to have sealed up pretty good. It doesn't seem like it's leaking anymore, so I'll probably run it a little bit and change the oil again. But let's take it out for a quick ride up the driveway. Second gear, the cultivating gear. which in my opinion is probably still too fast. Because of the taller tires, the AVs typically go faster than a typical, you know, A or Super A. Nice for running down the road though. They didn't change the gearing in the final drives or the transmission to compensate for the taller tires on these tractors. So like I said, the high clearance models with this 36-inch tires will tend to go faster. And like a typical Farmall, you've got about 3/4 of a turn of slop in the steering before it actually catches. Very, very common to see on these. It's just a shame these fields aren't lined with rows of peppers or tomatoes or squash. Not like the old days. A little bit of gear noise in the transmission, but nothing unusual. And then the road gear. Gotta say, this is a lot better than my old Cup that I used to have. That thing barely made enough power to get out of its own way. Oop. Yeah, it's definitely gonna need to get the carburetor rebuilt, I think. I think I'm just, at this point, it's just knocking loose whatever dirt is left in the tank or in the lines. She gets up and goes though. I just wish I had a little bit bigger of a garden to cultivate. So there you guys have it, 1949 Farmall Super AV, high clearance. And really do like this tractor, but we'll see what happens. See if I can get in touch with the guy in Connecticut that has what supposedly was my grandfather's Super AV, the second one he bought. And if it all works out, maybe I'll be making a trip up to Connecticut. We'll see if the guy wants to exchange this one for that one. But I've always loved these Super AVs. They're, you know, a staple of my childhood. They're a staple of the area where I grew up. You know, out here in Pennsylvania, you hardly ever see these. I think I've only ever seen maybe 2 of these tractors that shows out here, and they always bring up a good conversation because people just don't know much about them. So I kind of like this trend with the high crop or high clearance tractors I've been collecting. I'm hoping I can add a few more to the collection in the future, because I know where there's plenty more of them at. Just got to go to New Jersey. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.